It's not complicated. We want to slander McMurray so Wayne can win the election and I can beat Evan's view count. Now.
Slander. 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 Todo. Todo. Todo.
My name is Maja Rosén.
And my name is Lotta Hammar.
And I gave up flying about 10 years ago for climate reasons.
Pledge. 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 Decipher. 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 Infamy. 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 Splendor. Splendor. Splendor.
White House. Why would anyone be surprised when more of America is underwater? We need a president who respects science, who understands that the damage from climate change is already here. Unless we take urgent action, it will soon be more catastrophic. A president who recognizes, understands, and cares that Americans are dying, which makes President Trump's climate denialism, his disdain for science and facts, all the more unconscionable. Once again, he fails the most basic duty to a nation. He fails to protect us from the pandemic, from an economic freefall, from racial unrest, from the ravages of climate change. It's clear that we're not safe in Donald Trump's America.
Disdain. Disdain. Disdain.
They're concerned about political displays they call inappropriate. Our Hannah Brandt explains.
Political signs are certainly not uncommon here in Carroll Township, but it's this flag specifically that has a vulgar word on it that has some neighbors upset.
If you don't like Trump, then you probably won't like me.
There are political polls.
I like this one here, Trump, the revenge tour.
And then there are political flag polls.
What they say is what they say. It's just an opinion.
At this stand in Carroll Township, there are dozens.
Well, hey, I got to make a living somehow, you know.
Some more family-friendly than others.
The bestseller? Well, I can't really show you.
And this one is a red flag for neighbors.
And I just think that's disrespectful to everybody who lives here.
Chris O'Neill wants it taken down.
Vulgar. Vulgar. Vulgar.
Atolls of islands beyond the visible horizon simply by watching the reverberation of waves across the hull of their vessel, knowing full well that every island group in the Pacific has its unique refractive pattern that can be read with the same perspicacity with which a forensic scientist would read a fingerprint. These are sailors who in the darkness in the hull of the vessel can distinguish as many as 32 different sea swells moving through the canoe at any one point in time, distinguishing local wave disturbances from the great currents that pulsate across the ocean that can be followed with the same ease that a terrestrial explorer would follow a river to the sea. Indeed, if you took all of the genius that allowed us to put a man on the moon and applied it to an understanding of the ocean, what you would get is Polynesia.
Pulsate. Pulsate. Pulsate.
Allowing water to escape. The body detects these breaches and responds defensively, causing the inflammation that gives dandruff its itch. It also makes the skin cells proliferate to repair the damaged barrier. Usually, our skin's outer surface, or epidermis, completely renews itself every 2 to 3 weeks. Epidermal cells divide, move outwards, die, and form the skin's tough outer layer, which gradually sheds off in single cells far too small to see. But with dandruff, cells churn out quickly to correct the broken barrier, meaning they don't mature and differentiate properly. Instead, they form large, greasy clumps around the hair follicle that are shed as visible flakes. This is how Malassesia's voracious appetite and our body's reaction to its byproducts lead to dandruff. Currently, the most
Proliferate. Proliferate. Proliferate.
My parents met as teenagers. They're both working really hard to emancipate from their families of origin. They're working really hard to emancipate from those families for two very different reasons. They found each other probably in the backseat of a Chevy. And at 16 years old, they got pregnant with my brother. They promptly dropped out of high school, got married, moved in together, and took the kind of low-paying jobs that high school dropouts get to take. 10 months after my brother was born, I was born. 10 months after my brother was born. The joke in my family growing up was that after my brother came out, my dad went right back in.
Emancipate. Emancipate. Emancipate.
Their words to be ephemeral, closely interwoven with the times and places where they were shown, and addressed the particulars of living in a locally and sensually embedded situation. Now, in addition to her work with Haha, Jacob also developed her own artistic projects that explored, among other things, the relationships between architecture and perceptual experience, the interface between architecture and the bodies of the peoples and animals inhabiting the built environment. And in this regard, Jacob has been the consummate collaborator who's worked in a collective with other artists, but also with architects, engineers, researchers in various fields over the years, really yielding a long list of solo exhibitions, publications, and residencies, nationally and internationally, too numerous to enumerate here, although I'd be remiss not to mention that she was formerly a fellow at the Radcliffe Institute in the year 2000.
Enumerate. 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 Succumb. Succumb. Succumb.
And so when I got to the Chicago Tribune, I became a national correspondent after a couple years in features, and I was the only female national correspondent. That wasn't a hardship, though. I mean, that's one of the interesting things. It was a situation, but it wasn't really a hardship. I realized that there were things I could actually do, situations I could penetrate, because I was, as Joan Didion once said, small and female and almost neurotically inarticulate. But it continues to perplex me and perturb me that even though there are a lot of women in a lot of great journalism jobs now, women still don't run very much. You know, it's the case of everything everywhere, right? There are not very many women at the very top.
Perturb. Perturb. Perturb.
Apocalyptic event in the world, except perhaps a zombie outbreak. An asteroid impacting Earth would release a tremendous amount of energy equivalent to its relative size and velocity. The one that wiped out the dinosaurs was estimated to be 7 to 8 miles long and upheaved a dust plume that spread across the planet while forest and plant life caught ablaze and spread. Today, that impact would have killed millions, leaving those who didn't perish rummaging for resources. To completely obliterate the human race, though, an estimated 60-mile wide asteroid would have to collide with our world. Number 1.
Obliterate. Obliterate. Obliterate.
Launches and consistency for a moment. Okay. I loved the graphic. We'll put it up here. The cumulative sales from your recent book, It's Your Turn. And you wrote, fast starts are never as important as a cultural hook, consistently showing up and committing to a process. So many folks that I get a chance to interact with, I feel like they're like, I want it now. And I'm like, you have no idea how long it takes. So I was wondering if you could speak to.
So let's talk about the worst name ever for an internet company, Kickstarter. It should be called Kick Finisher. Because people like come up with some cool idea, they put it on Kickstarter, and then they hassle every single person they know to get whatever promo they can. It's urgent, it's urgent, it's urgent. That's not how it works. You actually start 4 years, 6 years beforehand. You build a network, you pay it forward into the community. You are trusted, you are liked. And then the Kickstarter is easy Because you just whisper to people, oh yeah, you know me and the thing I do, it's ready. That's the end. It wasn't the
hassle, hassle, hassle.
Out of Dublin, Ireland, the notorious Conor McGregor.
Swagger, swagger, swagger.
How to use the words. Well, most people think that being good at Scrabble has to do with having an exhaustive vocabulary, but that's not really the case. And if you look at the history of the game, you'll see why. In 1938, when the American architect Alfred Mosher Butz created it, he gave each letter in the alphabet a letter point value. This is the little number on the bottom corner of the wooden tile that tells you how many points a letter is worth. To tabulate this, he counted the number of times a given letter appeared in periodicals such as the New York Times and the Saturday Evening Post. Then he assigned each letter points according to the frequency. E, which is by far the most common letter in English, became worth 1 point. Less frequent letters like F, H, and W were worth a couple more, and linguistic lone wolves like X and Z were assigned high point values. So forming longer words with rarer letters would net you the highest score. This meant that the best Scrabble player was the person with the most comprehensive knowledge of language. Duh.
Tabulate, tabulate, tabulate.
It took up a lot of space in the universe and still does. The thing about somebody who's very vivid in life is that they remain very vivid in death. And not just myself, but everyone who knew her, and even perfect strangers, have reported these kind of rare encounters, or where they hear her voice and they're so sure, or they're given a message, or they're, that she's so present and she never would have wanted to miss anything.
Yeah.
And that's why I think she's remained so present.
Yeah.
But I think that people with that much charisma and who take up that much room and that much space, it echoes and it continues. And I don't know whether that's her spirit from the beyond still in all its power, or whether it's the residual echo of how much she filled the world,
Yes.
that we're still hearing it and feeling it, a year and a half after her death.
I want to read
Residual, residual, residual.
Decisions. When Columbia University and the Knight Foundation, Lee Bollinger and Alberto Ibargüen, staunch defenders of human rights and the First Amendment, announced your appointment in the Institute, they pointed to the necessity in this shifting paradigm of protecting speech in the digital age. Mm-hmm. How do you see your work in the context of the surveillance, the secrecy, and privacy dimensions? How do you see this institute fulfilling its promise in a way that mm-hmm. protects these digital spaces in a way maybe they're not protected right now?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think that it's important to recognize that these same technologies that I have thus far been describing as a threat also have a lot of promise. They're social media platforms.
Staunch, staunch, staunch.
name for herself, and also why she married these 7 men and what happened along those marriages. This book is just absolutely remarkable. I have never encountered a book that was able to appeal to a huge variety of different reading tastes. Taylor Jenkins Reid is just such a talented author when it comes to every aspect from prose to characterization and storytelling structure. It is just such a thrilling story that I'm incapable of putting down. It is scandalous and glamorous and deals with so many incredible topics like race, domestic abuse, sexuality, and so much more. I know this book is very hyped and
Scandalous. Scandalous. Scandalous.
Bringing our education. In other words, it's all nurture, not nature.
So one important feature of the American Revolution is that ultimately it becomes a revolution against the king and against aristocracy. It started primarily as an independence movement, separating North America from England, but not necessarily a movement against the nature of British government as such. Tom Paine is extraordinarily important in this way in helping to rally the people of the North American colonies to the revolutionary movement, and he does it in part by calling on them to embrace republicanism, embrace a more popular government, and reject hereditary forms of government represented in aristocracies and the king. And that sweeps through the North American continent like wildfire. It's embraced by the Americans. It becomes a feature of their revolutionary constitutions. They're being formed in the states. And so by the time you're drafting the U.S. Constitution,
Hereditary. Hereditary. Hereditary.
Jackie Gleason is remembered as one of the most iconic stars of the 20th century, but underneath his jocular, smiling public demeanor, he dealt with considerable inner turmoil. These are the tragic details about Jackie Gleason. Jackie Gleason was born on February 26, 1916, to parents Herbert Walter Gleason and May Maisie Kelly, who hailed from County Cork in Ireland. Curiously enough, while Gleason was born Herbert John Gleason, he was baptized as John Herbert Gleason. The nickname Jackie was given to him by his mother, and it stuck. Gleason grew up in Bushwick, Brooklyn, which was a very impoverished area at the time. According to Gleason's website, young Jackie knew that he wanted to be an actor from the age of 6 when his father used to take him to see matinee silent films and vaudeville performances. Unfortunately, the theater visits would be the only good memory that Gleason would have of his father. Herbert Gleason would walk out on his family when Jackie was only 9 years old. Jackie Gleason never saw his father again.
Jocular. Jocular. Jocular.
In 1400, Newcastle became an independent county, but the castle remained in Northumberland. Felons from Newcastle could seek refuge in the castle as authorities had no power within. Queen Elizabeth's 1589 charter put an end to that loophole. In 1809, the dwellings, shops and derelict bailey were demolished to make way for the present Moot Hall. Moot is an Old English word for meeting. This new building, designed by William Stokoe, reflects the vogue for a fanciful version of ancient Greek style. The Moot
Derelict. Derelict. Derelict.
This idea of a pedal point, it's like a sense of something's about to happen, right? We use them in pre-choruses a lot, or as a lead up to a cadential point where there's some sense of arrival that happens later. So I just let that ride the entire composition, I'm not joking, until the very last chorus where I do something a little bit different here. So next up, I took another piece of that Platters song. It's a sort of a falsetto-y, very dynamic moment with the vocals saying, ah! And so I've stretched it, I've pitched it, and I've made it from something that was kind of sweet and endearing to something pretty terrifying. So again, just trying to take all the source material and do something interesting with it to continue to tell my story.
Endearing. Endearing. Endearing.
We must say to them, where's the proof? Where's the evidence? We must hold their feet to the fire. We must not treat it as if their lies are the same as the facts. And as I said earlier, truth is not relative. Many of us have grown up in the world of the academy and enlightened liberal thought where we're taught everything is open to debate. But that's not the case. There are certain things that are true. There are indisputable facts, objective truths. Galileo taught it to us centuries ago, even after being forced to recant by the Vatican that the earth moved around the sun. He came out, and what is he reported to have said? And yet it still moves. The earth is not flat. The climate is changing. Elvis is not alive.
Recount. Recount. Recount.
When Brittany died, other voices continued her campaign. This is Jennifer Glass. She was 49 years old with lung cancer when she told the Senate, "I am doing everything possible to extend my life. No one should have the right to prolong my death." This is Christy O'Donnell. Christy fought on two fronts. She testified and lobbied the legislature, and she's also asking the courts to give her doctors permission to write her a prescription for life-ending medication that she can take if the law is not in time for her. Well, if you ever doubted that one person could change the world, Brittany should disavow you of that belief. Brittany lived her values, she spoke her truth, and she gave us the hope that when death comes, it can come gently for you and me and the millions of people who will inevitably follow her.
Disavow. Disavow. Disavow.
People always ask, well, what about the crime of brandishing a firearm? What if I'm at the Smith's grocery store and I bend over and somebody sees I've got a gun in my waistband and they scream, "He's got a gun!" and they run out and the whole store clears and they call the police? Am I in trouble? Have I brandished a firearm? No. So the crime of brandishing a firearm occurs when you do two things. First, you show somebody a gun. So somebody sees a gun. The second element of the crime that has to be present is you must have showed them a gun in a rude, angry, or threatening manner. When I bend over at the grocery store, am I being rude, angry, or threatening? No. so it's not a crime, right? If I bend over at the grocery store, you see my gun, I point at you, and I do one of these, right? Right? That's brandishing. Now all of a sudden I've been threatened. Or more commonly, we're in an argument, right? We're arguing about something, and I lift my shirt.
Brandish. 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 Douse. Douse. Douse.
Welcome to 8 out of 10 Cats Does Countdown, a show about letters, numbers and conundrums. Did you know, for example, the word pension comes from an old Anglo-Saxon word for rent? Most people don't understand pensions, but they're really simple. Every Thursday, you put on a grey wig, dress up as your dead nan and collect her money from the post office.
Conundrum. Conundrum. Conundrum.
As we mentioned in our video on scalpels, we can hold the instrument either in an overhand or a pencil grip. Whichever grip we use, it's important that when we make the incision, we use the body of the scalpel blade to cut the skin, rather than just the tip. As the body of the scalpel is the sharpest area of the blade, this allows us to make a smooth and uniform incision. Additionally, it's important the blade be kept perpendicular, so at right angles to the skin. This prevents any angulated incisions deeper to the surface of the skin, which may result in unequal skin surfaces or shelving of the skin edges. It's important to avoid these things, as if they occur, they may lead to poor wound healing or cosmesis.
Incision. Incision. Incision.
To look at the whole truth.
I have a question for you. So would you like get bills, like they would come in and you just wouldn't open them, you'd like stick them in a drawer?
Yeah.
So did you pay minimums? Okay.
I knew what my minimum was on every card, and I had a lot of them.
Yes.
So it was like this kind of shell game where I would just pay a little more than the minimum, which made me feel like, oh, I'm making a little progress, but I really wasn't. And I was just in this quagmire. And I felt really inauthentic because I was out running a business. I was teaching women about different streams of income and thinking in new ways about cash flow. But behind the scenes, I had all this financial chaos, and I knew I wasn't taking responsibility for it. The whole thing, it felt really, really awful. And it wasn't, I mean, it was that way around the time that you and I met. Yeah. And I was hiding it.
Really? Mm-hmm. That's so interesting. And so
Quagmire. Quagmire. Quagmire.
like to begin with the outside of the face first, the hair shape, then I move on to the features inside of the face. I add the hair usually as the last couple of steps, not the back of the hair yet until I add the body or the torso.
When it comes to the color, I like to use the most efficient ways so I can draw as fast as possible, color in as fast as possible as well. So I choose the skin tone as the base color, and I do all of the shading with that one color.
Caricature. Caricature. Caricature.
So in the Hobby Lobby case, are they framing corporations possessing more rights as persons than people as individuals? Are they reframing our relationship to corporations?
I'll give you an oblique answer to that. I think you have to understand Hobby Lobby, setting it alongside the other big religion case this term, which is a case called Town of Greece against Galloway, which upheld the recitation of Christian prayers at the start of town board meetings in this upstate New York town. And this practice was challenged by two non-Christian citizens who didn't feel like having to listen to these prayers when they showed up at the town board to conduct their business. And they argued, and the lower court agreed, that this was, in effect, an establishment of religion in violation of the First Amendment's Establishment Clause. Justice
Oblique. Oblique. Oblique.
Here's something to make you really, really mad. Our country's infrastructure is crumbling. Potholes are becoming sinkholes, axle killers, tire busters. Our cities struggle to pay for services. The powers that be in bankrupt Detroit even cut off the water to some residents. Schools and libraries are closing. Public parks decay. And the war party in Washington clamors for billions of dollars more for foreign interventions, bombs, rockets, drones, even troops. 20 million Americans who would like a full-time job still can't get one. Yet corporations are sitting on more than $2 trillion in cash, while revenue from corporate income taxes are down from 40% in 1943 to just below 10% in 2012. All this as some of the largest and richest corporations are now resorting to legal hanky-panky that allows them to renounce their citizenship, meaning they can pretend to be headquartered abroad and make big profits on which they pay little or no U.S. taxes. Here's what President Obama said recently about that practice known as inversion.
Now here's the problem is this loophole they're using in our tax laws is actually legal. It's so simple and so lucrative. One corporate attorney said it's almost like the holy grail of tax avoidance schemes. My attitude is I don't care if it's legal, it's wrong.
Now look at
lucrative. 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 Rotund. Rotund. Rotund.
We're able to do this installation where we bring these different cultures together and how different cultures portray deities, how different cultures portray idealization. One of the masterpieces of the African collection, and really the collection as a whole, is this just really exquisite head possibly of a king. It's an idealized portrait head from the Ife culture in Nigeria. And it's definitely one of my favorite pieces. The beauty of the piece really, for me, transcends time and culture, but you immediately see that as an African piece and you kind of personally relate to it.
Yeah, I think for me,
exquisite, exquisite, exquisite.
In a doctor's office or in a hospital. Most of them are not even wheelchair accessible. My mother uses a wheelchair. They used to just assume she wasn't having sex, so they wouldn't offer her a pap smear. And so one of the things you want to avoid if you plan for your death is you want to, ideally we come to our death without piles and piles of regret. So when I'm working with patients, especially upstream of their death, I'm always encouraging them to feel things, enjoy the body they have while they have it, appreciate their body while they have it, because it's someday going to go and you're going to miss it. So touch is just profound. It's elemental. It is, even if you think about, I think the scourge of dementia, for example, and a lot of us are terrified of this eventuality. We're going to lose our minds. Yeah, and it's hard, and I do not, that is a very difficult prospect.
Scourge, scourge, scourge.
As an artist in a place like this, and as I learn more and more about it, I'm fascinated by the complexities of it and how practically every plant and every little creature plays a role in the overall balance of a place. If I sit down to do a watercolor, I have to sit the chair down, find a spot, commit myself to at least an hour and a half of time. In a pencil sketch, I can frequently get at least a contour of the shadows. The cactus, I got a little more detailed on the shapes, and the line drawings kind of help me put it into a bigger context. The length of time it takes to do a watercolor, by the time you're 3/4 of the way finished, the light has changed completely. That's the advantage of having a photograph to refer to just for the light and the color. For years, I didn't
contour, contour, contour.
There is a deficiency in some emotion or pattern of behavior. Courage is a good example of this idea because courage seems to be in between cowardice and foolhardiness. The cowardly person has too much fear, and the foolhardy person has too little. So I agree with Aristotle that there are two vices opposed to courage. But I think there is an interesting difference in the way we respond to the vice of cowardice and the vice of foolhardiness or rashness. We feel contempt for the cowardly person, but I don't think we feel contempt for the foolhardy person. I agree that we disapprove of foolhardiness, but we might still feel fascination, even maybe an odd kind of admiration for such a person, because he or she has overcome ordinary human fear. You might think of feats of recklessness, like James Dean in Rebel Without
Cowardice, cowardice, cowardice.
That is teaching, research, and service.
Beyond that, we have something even more powerful, our student body. Within the first days of the crisis, it became clear that the students weren't going to wait for us to lead them. They were moving forward with unity and a constructive energy that's been inspiring to all of us. Here are just two quick examples. By the end of the first week, student leaders had organized a candlelight vigil on the Old Main Lawn to show support for the victims of child sexual abuse. Thousands of Penn State students and community members joined together in the stillness of a cold, dark night to remind others that at the core of the issue we faced were children who had been gravely harmed. The following week,
visual, visual, visual.
One kind of bigotry, what you see in return is a multiplication of that sometimes too.
Yes. We call that the Streisand Effect for historical reasons at EFF. I think that's right. I mean, so not only is it dangerous to put somebody in charge of that, but you'll lose, right? Because people find ways to communicate ideas to each other regardless. You can't, they're not magical keywords that only bad people use, that good people don't use. You've got, you know, if you've got a picture of, you know, I think that, you know, this example, I heard your ADL thing, you know, if you've got a picture of, you know, Auschwitz, that might actually be something that's very powerful and something we think ought to be shared in one context and something that's really awful and should not be shared in another. And expecting Twitter to be omniscient enough about every single situation in the world such that they could that they've got people who could make those decisions and make them in the way that you and I would think were right.
Let me tell you what the problem is.
Wishful thinking.
It may be wishful.
Omniscient, omniscient, omniscient.
Threat, right? Even if you didn't really love that talent, he just didn't want to lose anybody,
right?
Because he didn't want any Fox person drawing viewers away to another channel. So he definitely wasn't going to lose 30% of the viewers, as this man who by August of 2015 we knew was the likely Republican nominee, or at least he was the front runner for that time.
Right.
He didn't want that guy to be driving a division between Roger and the viewers. But Roger was tough. He was no pushover. So, and I think Roger felt he had more power within the Republican Party and had done more for America than Donald Trump ever had. And so he wasn't ready to just lie down for Trump. He was mad at Trump, too, for the way he was speaking about Fox. So I think there was some friction between them in the beginning. And, you know, Trump would continue to grow in power, and I think Ailes would get a little bit more deferential to him.
So,
differential, differential, differential.
I was a graduate student in 1990. I actually started working on ancient DNA and this very new field of ancient DNA. There were only a handful of papers that were published. And I talked to my advisor and got him to agree that I could give this a try. And I started doing some preliminary work with this brand new technology called PCR, right? And it was great, and I managed to, you know, I worked really hard and I got a few bands, and I did these analyses and saved them on my 5.5-inch floppy. And my advisor, it was very laborious, let me tell you. My advisor said, you know, there's this new conference, international conference on ancient DNA. Why don't you go to that and talk about what you've done? And so I printed out my paper on the dot matrix, and off I went to Nottingham, England. And there were really only 30 or 40 of us there. It included
laborious, laborious, laborious,
by a earlier version of Rudy Giuliani, not the one we know.
real
that-
Rudy Giuliani.
The
as
Rudy
I,
Giuliani
as I
that
will
we
always think about it.
Yeah, that's right. That we know and love. The Rudy Giuliani in our hearts, and became the bedrock of one of the. I think it's fair to say one of the most socially transformative public policy successes in American history, starting in New York City, but also copied around the country, where New York City police and other police departments started enforcing small quality of life issues, and as simple as things that it turns out if you jump turnstiles to get on a subway, you might be the kind of person who commits other crimes that are bigger, and you can stop them for that, and you talk to them, and you find out they got warrants on them, and we've seen this precipitous decline in, precipitous has a negative connotation, but we've seen this amazing decline in violent crime, in homicide, and all of these things as a result of the fact that there was this pre-made policy idea that was just sort of sitting around waiting for someone to get in power. And I think one of the
precipitous, precipitous, precipitous.
Hey everybody, today's topic is how do we calm our minds? How do we do it? So stay tuned. So like I said, today's topic is kind of like a meditation for beginners, because I hear from many of you that anxiety is one of your biggest struggles. And the racing mind, trust me, I have a racing mind too, and I completely understand the issue. And something that I do, and that I know many of my yoga teachers and my friends do, that kind of helps them calm their mind, is what I call meditation for beginners. Now, all you need is 10 to 15 minutes. You need an area where you're going to be quiet. No one's going to barge in on you, and put yourself in comfortable clothes. So that's kind of how I'd started out. In the end, they say that they hope you can do this at any time, any place, blah, blah, blah. But right now, we need to kind of create our own meditation environment. Now,
Barge in, barge in, barge in. Nibble at, nibble at, nibble at.
You feel that you've ever been manipulated, and if you want to, you can even share the full story. 1. A manipulator might ask you a ton of questions. The reason they do this is so that they can identify your strengths and your weaknesses and pry out of you the best angle to take to get what they want. This tactic is huge in sales because if you're selling something, it's wise to know as many details as you can about your potential customer before you start your sales approach. It gives you the upper hand. 2. A manipulator may distort facts. The reason they do this is because they have a biased view of that fact, because it's not beneficial to their argument. So if they don't distort that fact in some way, then there's a good chance they're not going to get what they want. 3. A manipulator could try to overwhelm you with information. If someone wants things to go a certain way and you're not complying, or you have another idea, a manipulative person might make that idea seem impossible or seem extremely difficult and overwhelm you with the ideas or the things that it might take to accomplish that result.
Pry out, pry out, pry out,
so used to being shortchanged out of real conversation, so used to getting by with less, that they become almost willing to dispense with people altogether. So, for example, many people share with me this wish that someday a more advanced version of Siri, the digital assistant on Apple's iPhone, will be more like a best friend, someone who will listen when others won't. I believe this wish reflects a painful truth that I've learned in the past 15 years. That feeling that no one is listening to me is very important in our relationships with technology. That's why it's so appealing to have a Facebook page or a Twitter feed, so many automatic listeners. And the feeling that no one is listening to me makes us want to spend time with machines that seem to care about us.
dispense with, dispense with, dispense with.
We've got to make sure that healthcare is available even when you lose your job, that you have a retirement account that follows you with the job. Part of the reason we're an innovative society is that we've always felt that, you know what, if we take a risk and we make a misstep, that there's some cushion there for not just us, but for our families as well. And that's why universal health care is so important. That's why creating new systems to help people save is so important, so that will actually spur on people's willingness to take risks in the marketplace. Right now, they don't feel as if they're able to do so. Okay.
Spur on. Spur on. Spur on.
Decline before the Sea People started to arrive. The lesson here, if history teaches us anything, it is this: always pay your mercenaries. Oh, and maybe don't invade Russia, because that never seems to work. Really though, what I take away from this is that while the Sea People may have hammered the final nail in the Bronze Age coffin, we have to look elsewhere for the root cause. But before we can do that, there is one other hypothesis that we have to discuss, which is that the Sea People came bearing iron, that they had a technological advantage which allowed them to sweep aside the Bronze Age kingdoms. In this scenario, regardless of their motivation, they really would be the root cause for the Bronze Age collapse. Now, this was once a popular theory, but as our ability to date things has improved, it seems to have been largely disproven. There are some iron artifacts dating back to the period of the collapse, but it wasn't until 200 or 300 years later that we really start seeing iron being used on any sort of mass scale. So it seems pretty
Sweep aside. Sweep aside. Sweep aside.
And then I can get into that inner circle that Gary has. And when he was noticed and brought in, he said, I don't want to make you, I don't want to put you out here, but like, man, I can't believe this happened so much sooner. Which happened, what, 4 or 5 months in, 3 months in. When he says so much sooner, he was in the, I don't want to speak for you, 18 months, 25, like when were you going to give up by not getting noticed?
There's no giving up, but at least a year's time was my focus.
So he would have gave up after a year, but that's the key, right? Like he came in and he wanted to pay forward, and his version of paying forward in being my ecosystem was come into Vayner, start at the bottom, work it to the top, and so, you want a mentor? Why don't you provide that mentor with so much upfront value that you guilt her or him into mentoring you?
Hey, Gary.
Put out. Put out. Put out.
It forces the rest of us to pick up the tab when their workers get sick, and gives those businesses an unfair advantage over their competitors. And unless everybody does their part, many of the insurance reforms we seek, especially requiring insurance companies to cover pre-existing conditions, just can't be achieved. And that's why under my plan, individuals will be required to carry basic health insurance, just as most states require you to carry auto insurance. Likewise, businesses will be required to either offer their workers health care or chip in to help cover the cost of their workers. There will be a hardship waiver for those individuals who still can't afford coverage, and 95% of all small businesses, because of their size and narrow profit margin, would be exempt from these requirements.
Chip in. Chip in. Chip in.
Cells proliferate to repair the damaged barrier. Usually, our skin's outer surface, or epidermis, completely renews itself every 2 to 3 weeks. Epidermal cells divide, move outwards, die, and form the skin's tough outer layer, which gradually sheds off in single cells far too small to see. But with dandruff, cells churn out quickly to correct the broken barrier, meaning they don't mature and differentiate properly. Instead, they form large, greasy clumps around the hair follicle that are shed as visible flakes. This is how Malacesia's voracious appetite and our body's reaction to its byproducts lead to dandruff. Currently,
Churn out. Churn out. Churn out.
Out of poverty. It shouldn't surprise us then to find that in spite of government actions such as fumigation, criminalization, and crop substitution programs, there are about 25,000 hectares, more than 61,000 acres of poppy growing in Mexico, and 600 hectares, nearly 1,500 acres, growing in Colombia today. If we compare this to the demand for heroin coming from markets like the United States, we see a basic correlation between supply and demand. There's no reason to think that demand will slow, especially not if US policymakers continue to crack down on opium-based medication, which will send more people who need palliative care to look to illegal sources, above all heroin. We've spent years treating the farmers who cultivate opium like criminals without getting any closer to a world free of drugs. The only thing they're
Crack down. Crack down. Crack down.
Their claws are a little bit brittle, so they don't walk with putting any pressure on them. They kind of tuck them under their bodies, and then they'll hobble when they walk and use their tail to help them balance, so they kind of look like little hobbits. Really adorable. They use these claws for digging into termite and anthill mounds. A single pangolin can consume up to 70 million ants by itself annually. And they do this because they have the longest tongue relative to its body size of any other mammal. Their tongue is so long that it has muscle attachments on its pelvis. So they use this really long tongue to stick it all the way down into these anthills and suck up all these other ants. They don't have any teeth, so they will ingest rocks and other kinds of hard materials that help to grind up the ants in their stomachs. And even though they are primarily anteaters, they aren't actually anteaters as you might know them. They are in totally different orders than the giant anteater or even armadillos. They're kind of like a mashup between an armadillo and an anteater, but they're physiologically so unique that they're in their own order, as they are right now.
Grind up. Grind up. grind up,
Please raise your right hand and repeat after me. I, Kamala Davy Harris, do solemnly swear
I, Kamala Davy Harris, do solemnly swear
that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States
that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States
against all enemies, foreign and domestic,
against all enemies, foreign and domestic,
that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same,
that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same,
that I take this obligation freely
that I take this obligation freely
without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion,
without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion,
that I will well and faithfully discharge
that I will well and faithfully discharge
the duties of the office on which I am about to enter.
the duties of the office upon which I am about to enter.
So help me God.
So help me God.
swear in, swear in, swear in, ship out, ship out, ship out,
And it's been a really wonderful process for me.
Excellent. So I want to also encourage you to give yourself permission to ask some questions.
So I wanted to see if you had any tips for how we can continue to foster this really entrepreneurship culture or really creative culture in a big company.
Yeah, well, you're very fortunate to be in a company that I believe really encourages this. But I know that in a lot of big companies, that's not the case. And in fact, this is something that happens a lot. You can chime in if you've heard this as well. The students come out of our classes and they're so really enthusiastic about their newfound creative confidence and skills. And then they realize they're going to go into a company where that may or may not be supported. So there are a few things you can do.
chime in, chime in, chime in,
Totally agree. And I would say that something I definitely would encourage anyone who feels a bit aimless in that regard to do is find one local issue specifically that you care a lot about, because state or God forbid national politics can feel like such an overwhelming mess, and it is very difficult on an individual level, provided you're not insanely rich, to enact a ton of influence there. But trust me, you pick a local issue and it'll just be you and 3 other people in like a veterans hall screaming at each other, but you guys will be able to really enact change. And having at least one issue outside of yourself that you feel genuine motivation and drive about really helps kind of ebb away at that sense of hopelessness, which is the ultimate killer. Despair and hopelessness are the 2 things you can never.
ebb away, ebb away, ebb away.
Look at your brother, he plays. You want to play with him? I mean, that's okay, we ask, we hand out the advice. What? Look at us. Are you sleepy? Sleepy all the time. I thought 2 hours the day is enough. Biết? Anh thà ra ngoài đừng coi mờ, anh mực tận đó tận mực đê chứ nè, mực đê chứ. Rất ạ. Okay. Sit here, because that we cannot put you to sleep now, because when they put you in the bed, you don't sleep. And now that we have to take care of it, okay? So, okay, if you sleep together with Alice.
Nod off. Nod off. Nod off.